Oh, you exceedingly brilliant gangrel creatures. Welcome back to the Overclock Workshop. I was about to say it's been a break, but definitely hasn't been a break. There's been a normal amount of time since the last one, which is 2 weeks. But obviously we're moving into new territory now. I was considering a break in between, but I saw no reason to do that. There's nothing else I'd rather do today in regards to making a video. So here we are. But what I mean in terms of entering new territory is we're not discussing tools anymore. We're actually going even further into things that don't and won't get overclocks in Deep Rock Galactic, which is grenades. At this point, you're probably wondering why I haven't sort of rebranded the series in some way visually. That's because it's not. I don't think it's because I'm lazy, right? Because I think a lazy person wouldn't do it even if they thought they should. I just don't see much good reason. It can stay as the Overclock Workshop. I can just sort of work around it with what I say. Because obviously, when you touch grenades in regards to overclocks, you're entering a strange territory because grenades are something that they don't even have upgrades. So these videos, the grenade ones, are going to take the form of sort of positing potential grenade modifications / overclocks. And I think you'll see what I mean actually by the first one actually. Obviously we're starting with, in our order of going through engineer to gunner to driller to scout, although I'll do it one grenade at a time, as in it'll be L.U.R.E, then sticky grenade, then impact axe, then IFG, and then we'll go through. It won't be all of engineer first, because remember that would take 2 months still. So, you're welcome. But this does mean the very first one is going to be the L.U.R.E, which is something that we have quite harsh opinions on, and something that we've caught flack for our harsh opinions on. I don't feel like elaborating on those thoughts. Just know that it's a weak grenade in the sense that obviously we know it doesn't do any damage, but it does, but it's really not good dealing damage, and it's also, its effects are not that strong. I understand the use of it, but I've never felt like it's actually good enough for what it does. There absolutely should be a hologram L.U.R.E grenade in the game. That's a very common mechanic in shooters. It absolutely earns its place as part of the engineer's arsenal and part of Deep Rock Galactic in general. I do just wish it was somewhat better. And if you want to follow that line of thinking, then the very first overclock is perfect for that, because it's a clean called Home Improvement, which basically adds to every single useful stat, such as the amount of targets that you can acquire, the number of enemies that the L.U.R.E can attract. It's usually stuck at 10, or it is stuck at 10, but you just increase it to 15 in this case. The L.U.R.E hologram also has health. And now, when I think about the electric shockwave it produces, I still don't know if it produces that when it runs out of time or when it runs out of health. I don't actually know. But either way, it will last longer and last longer. It's got increased health and increased lifetime anyway, and increased max targets. So when I talk about sort of modulating this series to, in what I say to make it make sense, I mean something like this is just a set of modifications. This could be your first tier of grenade mods that you choose from. Increased max targets, increased health, or increased lifetime. There's a couple of these for a couple of the other grenades. I generally avoided it. I just think in the L.U.R.E, this is what I would really want. If I could pick one thing to take, it would be to take this. Increase all of these useful stats to make the L.U.R.E as good as I think it should be, basically. But in the context of the game, and I should probably point out, we're actually probably more likely to get grenade mods or overclocks than we are to get traversal and support tool overclocks, because they're very strict on the way that support and traversal tools are meant to operate, and overclocks, especially balanced and unstable ones, would sort of betray that, which I do understand. I still think there's room for more upgrades though. But the kids' grenades, they have neither upgrades nor overclocks, and they have said that they haven't actually shut down the idea. They've just said that it's not really something they thought about, which makes sense because grenades aren't a huge part of your arsenal. They're still thought about. We got new grenades recently, but they're not huge in that way. They never had upgrades to begin with, because that was never an original conception for them. They're very much so just grenades, and that's absolutely fine. But it's why I sort of see Overclocks in a little bit of a different light, where it's like, in this case, I suppose these three positives could just be turned into gear modifications, but in general, the reason why I see grenade overclocks being a valid addition is because it will be a way of really bumping up the grenade variety, especially if it was mainly just balanced and unstable ones. They could essentially create new grenades without making new grenades, and also giving people more stuff to unlock. But that's up to them. But for this one, the only thing I can say about it is that it would be just the three first tier choices, basically, if the grenades got upgrades instead of overclocks. So that's all there is on that one, really. But the next one is a balanced one, which I wouldn't say any of these ones for the lure are really like new grenades. There's a couple ones, but I do take it quite far. But you'll see that later on. Next, though, is the Running Man. It's the balanced overclock, which actually reduces the hologram health, but the whole idea is that it will be much more effective at sort of keeping itself alive by running around. So it says the hologram runs around and away from enemies. I suppose there's no point making a distinction between running around and away. I assume it would just run in a random pattern and try to avoid running into enemies so as to not get killed. So what are the benefits of this? Well, chances are, even though reducing its health, it's probably going to stay alive a lot longer. It's also going to lead enemies on more interesting paths, such as away from you or even possibly towards you in an unfortunate scenario. It could group them up in more interesting ways. It could lead groups of enemies into groups of enemies that aren't attracted to the lure. I think there's a lot of reasons why this could be quite a lot of fun and have some decent utility as well. That's really where my heart lies a bit. It would be a lot of fun to see and use, but it wouldn't be devoid of purpose. Especially if, considering the way that it works, it means that it would last a lot longer anyway because it's running around and it wouldn't get hit as much. Therefore, the negative isn't much of a negative anyway. I think, it could even be a clean, this one, really, and then, no one would really complain in that context. But yeah, it's just a good amount of fun and maybe a good amount of utility. Yeah, the Running Man. God, I just realised how little I have to say about it. But the next one, actually, I will have a bit more to say about. It's electric moves, which would be an unstable overclock. This is really just jacking up, though, the electric part of the lure. It releases an electric blast. I still don't know if it's on death or on expiration. But it still happens sometimes, and it kills swarmers, but nothing else. It's really not a very powerful effect. I want to sort of take it further to make it actually useful, but make it more of an electric grenade than a lure, perhaps, or at least in the context of the overclock. Getting to the truth of this would be sort of figuring out a way to extract from this idea gear modifications, upgrades for the lure that would follow this part of it, that would go down the line of increasing the electric damage. But in this case, all it does, it allows it to release an electromagnetic pulse when damaged, with quite a wide radius. I think it's pretty much the same as, actually, it's like EM turret discharge, but not quite as strong. And I wrote in that it has like a Thorns cooldown. That's just in terms of how long it takes to cool down. It also deactivates when in cooldown, which obviously is a very short window of when it's not active, but still, it could end up latching enemies onto you instead of the lure. And it's also not as good at that in general, but overall, it will be it's deactivating when damaged actually means it's not going to get damaged unless it can release an electric pulse. So it will actually keep itself alive for a very long time and end up releasing a lot of electric pulses, even though they only do 20 damage. It's a wide radius, and it will be able to get out enough to kill a good amount of grunts, I'm sure. So it would end up being a very effective distraction / powerful electric grenade with actual killing potential. As an overclock, obviously, we need to sort of think about it in a way where it isn't an overclock, perhaps. And what I would do with that is probably the electric Thorns part, but just maybe minimized. That's all I can really think of, It's like this one actually works so much better as an unstable overclock than anything else. I suppose you could add more electric damage would be the easiest way to reinterpret it as an upgrade, but that's kind of boring. Why I really would like grenade overclocks, because that's part of the reason why I do these videos now. It's like I want to show the potential for overclocks in places where they aren't now, which is tools and grenades. So I hope I've done a bit of that, especially this one. I mean, I really can't turn it as it is into an upgrade, because the first point, if you took the first positive on its own, it would actually be really overpowered. If perhaps it didn't deactivate, meaning enemies would keep attacking it, but it would just occasionally release extra pulses, that could actually be fairly well balanced, and that might work as a final tier. Oh, I'm not going to say 5th tier, because I imagine if grenades ever got upgrades, they'd probably wouldn't go up to 5th tier, probably 2 or 3 at most. But this could be like a final tier upgrade still, where it just releases electric pulses when damaged on a cooldown, but it doesn't deactivate. The enemies will keep attacking it, so it's not going to be able to get that many pulses out. It'll get a couple extra ones out in like best case scenario, probably about 2 or 3. But I think the use would still be apparent. I suppose you would probably expect it to deal fear, but I suppose that's why it deactivates when in cooldown. It's so that things don't keep damaging it, so it doesn't actually need the fear. It's already performing the art of fear by attracting enemies. I suppose it'd be interesting if the lure was a lot more deadly and then had a long cooldown where you would actually be in danger when it's in cooldown. But in this case, it's got a short cooldown that it's really not a negative. It really just keeps it alive, which is why I really like this as an unstable overclock. And I'm struggling to turn it into anything else. But that's just proving to me how much I want grenade overclocks, because you can get something like this out of it. I know that this alone won't make a good enough case. I know that no one person can probably make a good enough case for grenade overclocks, but I hope I'm doing my part in sort of potentially proving potential for grenades to have overclocks, and I'll continue to do so every other week. There'll be another episode of this, right until boomerangs, which will be the last one, which is, if you want to look at the timeline of that, that's in 32 weeks. Which is nuts. Anyway, I think that's actually what I've got on the. Well, I mean, I know it's what I've got on the lures. Next up would be the plasma burst. No, not the plasma burst. The sticky grenade. Which actually, sticky grenade is another one that I'm not too hot on, but I think I've made some things introduced, conceptualized some mechanics for it that would be really interesting. Maybe the lure not so much. I feel like maybe I could have done a little bit better. Maybe it's just because of that clean one, where I just really wanted to be just better overall. Maybe there's a bit of that going on. Maybe let's talk about that just briefly, because like the lure thing, we got a lot of flack for our placement of it. We put it in D tier in our tier list, which I think is wrong, although we only really think it should go up to C. Like I said, it definitely has its place in the game, but especially conceptually, like a hologram lure item is well founded in sci-fi shooters. You just look at Halo, just immediately, as an example. But a lot of people, a lot of its defenders argued for S tier, calling it overpowered and whatnot, and I just can't really side with that for so many reasons. Like, I sort of view the game in two sort of iterations. You have Hazard 4 and below and Hazard 5. And I mostly focus on Hazard 5, like almost exclusively, but I'm still aware of Hazard 4 and below. But in Hazard 4 and below, the lure isn't needed because it's so easy. In Hazard 5, the lure, especially in multiplayer, given that you can only attract 10 enemies at a time, that's not a very useful number of enemies to attract when the hordes are made up of dozens upon dozens, up to like 100 even enemies. It's really not doing anything meaningful. It's not grouping them up more than they probably already are, or more than you can just train them to be grouped up and then get a lot more kills with your other grenades. Or you just take shadows which get all those kills anyway without the enemies needing to be grouped up. The lure does come off as somewhat useless to me quite often, except like a few choice builds, mainly just using Plascrete Catalyst, and it kind of just stops there. And that's kind of the thing about this series. I mean, I like most of the grenades, and even the lures I do like to a certain extent. I just wish they were a lot better. And this just shows it's my way of showing some of the ways that I think they could be better. Even though some of the like electric moves would have to come in the form of an overclock because it's too much of a change from what the L.U.R.E normally does. And that's another reason, though, why I think maybe grenade overclocks have a chance of being added over traversal support to overclocks, is because I don't think people are as attached to what grenades do. Even then, you'd have cleans that would only add little benefits and not even really change what the grenade really does. So, in my opinion, it's perfectly acceptable of an idea. It wouldn't really break anyone's expectations. It's just whether or not Ghost Ship believe in grenades that much to put in the work to create a set of overclocks for them all, which I think they could very easily argue against. At the same time, it would be valuable content. They want to make content that's accessible to everyone. I understand why it's taking a while to sort of just bring in a new load of overclocks for all the pre-existing weapons, because that stuff just gets thrown into a pool, and that's like sort of hidden behind RNG that a lot of players won't necessarily know that a lot of that stuff is new. I do think there are enough players though who are accustomed to all the pre-existing weapons that they would like them to be freshened up in some way with new overclocks. But still, I understand the reasoning there, assuming that is their reasoning. I don't actually know. But in the case of grenades, it would still be accessible to everyone in the fact that you'd see that grenades have overclocks, and that would come across as like a interesting feature. It's just like, oh, I wonder when I'm going to get some grenade overclocks, for example. So I sort of see it in that way. So I hope I've shown some interesting ideas for the L.U.R.E, and I hope I've like sort of decently enough explained some points about why there's good reason for grenade overclocks to potentially exist, and why there's a better chance of them existing over traversal and support to overclocks. But either way, that's definitely all I've got for today. If you enjoyed, please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell for future workshops if you want, and your boss. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, guys. See you next time. Take care.